Welcome to the seminar on religion and democratic pluralism, the Indonesian model. And it is my great pleasure to welcome our friends from Indonesia to Yale, to the Macmillan Center. And as the director of the Religious Freedom and Society Project in Africa, based at the Macmillan Center, I'd like to add my words of welcome to those of Ian Shapiro, who welcomed us only a few minutes ago at the Macmillan Center as the director of the Macmillan Center. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our friends, and then the format is they will speak on the issue of religion, democratic pluralism, the Indonesian model, and I have some primers which I picked up from their own writings and their own reflections on the subject, and I'll try and present that as a way of priming the pump and getting the discussion going. First of all, I should express our gratitude to the Lamena Institute, which is headed as president by Ambassador Jacob Tobing. In many ways, really, the father of the Indonesian constitution. And he was a member of the National Committee for the first democratic elections in Indonesia and laid the foundation for democracy by rewriting the constitution in the Parliament of 1999 and 2002. And it transformed the world's largest Muslim majority country with 260 million people into the world's third largest democracy. And afterwards, he served as ambassador to South Korea, where he orchestrated, masterminded a summit between Indonesia and North Korea's head of state and president of the Supreme People's Assembly, South Korea's president as well, Prime Minister Lee Hae-chang. For his service, he was awarded the Gangwon Medal, the Republic of Korea's highest diplomatic award. He received an MPA from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at the other place on the River Charles. I will also take time to introduce Dr. Alwi Shihab, who is the president of Indonesia's Special Envoy to the Middle East and the Organization of Islamic Countries, OIC. He was formerly the coordinating minister for people's welfare and the foreign minister of Indonesia. A leading scholar on interfaith relations between Muslims and Christians in particular, he's the author of the best-selling book, The Inclusive Islam, Toward an Open Attitude in Religion. He also serves in the board of trustees of the Hartford Seminary, not far from us here in Hartford, and advisor to the Council of Fetzer Institute that promotes love, forgiveness, and compassion. He was a visiting scholar at Harvard's Center for the Study of World Religions, where I myself spent many years on the faculty there. He is the recipient of 2 doctoral degrees in Ain Shams University in Cairo and Temple University in Philadelphia. Dr. Hameen Abdullah, who was my wonderful host at the State University of Jakarta in January, is the professor of Islamic philosophy and the first rector of the State Islamic University of Yogyakarta. He's the chairman of the Indonesian Academy of Sciences Cultural Commission. His work on religion and science and integration and interconnection has greatly influenced Islamic higher education in Indonesia. A prominent scholar on Quranic hermeneutics, tafsir, he developed a new hermeneutical approach to the Quran and advocates a new path in Islamic epistemology that is open to dialogue and integration with many different sources of knowledge. His PhD is in philosophy, Islamic philosophy, from the Middle East Technical University in Turkey, with postdoctoral study at McGill in Canada. Dr. Azumadi Azra is one of Southeast Asia's most distinguished Muslim intellectuals. He's professor of history and the vice president, and also vice president and visiting professor at New York University, at Oxford, University of Melbourne, and many others. He is the author of many, many books and articles in English and Arabic, and for his outstanding services, he was awarded the Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, CBE, by the Queen, by Queen Elizabeth II, and the Fukuoka Prize in Japan. He completed 3 master's degrees and a doctorate degree at Columbia University. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce Matthias Ho, who is co-founder of the Lemena Institute and executive director of the Institute. He spearheaded the development of leadership and citizenship programs to train leaders in churches and other institutions in Indonesia. He was formerly director and of a manufacturing company and a management consultant in Indonesia and Singapore. He is a founding trustee of John Stuart Langham Ministry in Indonesia. He received his BS and MS from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin, and studied at the Institute for Contemporary Christianity in London. I make these introductions as a way of getting myself out of the way and have them with Ambassador Tobing leading our discussion. And my idea is that we will open the discussion to the audience after they've had a chance to speak on the subject of the seminar. And I picked up some of the themes that will come up, I think, in our conversation here. The first is that as the world's largest Muslim country, Indonesia is committed to the cause of moderate Islam. The population is 260 million, of which Muslims are 87.2%, and more than 17,800 islands with 525 languages and dialects. It's a very, very rich country from that point of view. The second is that moderate Islam is being promoted in Indonesia under the banner of Middle Path Islam. The Indonesians call it wasatiyah, a term based on a verse in the Quran. Kadhalika ja'alnakum ummatan wasatan, it says in the Quran. I have therefore created you, made you a community of the middle, ummatan wasatan. The idea of the ummah there is community. And in many ways, Indonesia, the political system is based on this concept of community. Pancasila itself is not the Arkanuddin, not the 5 pillars of faith, but certainly the 5 pillars of community, solidarity, and integration. So moderate Islam is viewed as a pillar of Indonesia's system of government, which is a pluralist democracy that fosters religious tolerance. Fourth, religious pluralism, therefore, is regarded as very important for democracy as a whole in Indonesia. 5, Indonesia is committed to opposing radical Islam, including Wahhabi radical ideas of Islam. 6, the groups in civil society are recognized as indispensable to the climate of political moderation and religious tolerance, the climate that inspired the Indonesian constitution based on Pancasila, the 5 principles that make up the basis of the constitution in Indonesia. The Pancasila, I should just summarize the principles of Pancasila. Belief in the absoluteness of God, justice and civilized humanity. It's a kind of ethical humanism, really. Thirdly, the unity of Indonesia. Democracy guided by what they call inner wisdom. Participatory democracy, open democracy. And finally, social justice for all the peoples of Indonesia. That's really Pancasila, where I have to say to our friends, we are delighted to welcome you here. It is our honor and our privilege, Ambassador Tobin, to welcome you and your associates and colleagues to Yale.
Yeah, it's just for the recording. Yeah. It doesn't amplify. It's just for the recording.
Okay. Yes. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for arranging this seminar, and thank you for your moderating this session. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I think Professor Lamin has elaborated many aspects of Indonesian democracy. So I just want to emphasize some aspect of that. We began our reform process with a democratic election conducted in 1999 and participated by 48 political parties. This is a democratic election, and it's observed by international observers, including from Carter Center, from here, from European Union, and from other places in the world. And that 48 political parties, it ranged from center a little bit left to the right. But then the result of the election shows that people tend to vote for this middle range of political orientation. So this process of amending the constitution is conducted in a very open ways. So we invited also scholars or activists from United States, from South Africa, from Germany, Great Britain, from South Korea, Thailand, and every other parts of the world, besides people from Indonesia itself. And it was conducted in a deliberation ways and by consensus in a unplanned 4 stages of process from 1999 to 2002. So from hundreds of decisions taken during the process or agreement that achieved during the process, all of them is achieved through consensus, except one. It's about the existence of the representative of the military of the functional group, appointed members in the People's Assembly. In that voting, the members of the military and police voted against the existence of appointed members. And yeah, because of this process is conducted in a deliberative phase and emphasizing consensus, it's went very slow and sometimes rambling, but that's a situation where everybody thinks or feels a sense of ownership of the process, because no votes or no decision is taken by majority takes all approach. So even the smallest faction can contribute as much as possible, as long as it is acceptable by the others. And during the process, there was no attempt to make Indonesia an Islamic state. There is no attempts to make Islam as the state religion. While in our history, actually, we had these attempts either by, peaceful democratic ways during the old times, or by the bloody rebellions in some parts of the country which cost thousands of lives. But then we have all these things change, and we can achieve this achievement peacefully. And I could say that the very strategic factors that enable us to have such a situation is, one is our inclusive nationalism. Indonesia never a nation before. It is a new nation which declared in the 1928 during the what we call as Sumpah Pemuda, Youth Pledge. And the state itself, we never had Indonesia as a state before 1945. Before this archipelago consisted of, I think, hundreds of kingdoms, sultanates, and such kind of organization. And by this, thanks to our founding fathers and founding mothers, this very heterogeneous peoples declared themselves, accepted themselves as one nation. And the second strategic factors, important factors, is the existence of this Wasatiyah Islam, which comprises of almost 90% of the population, which most of them belongs to Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, which are very inclusive as well, and very used to harmonious living together with others, that enable us to have this situation. So I can say that this is kind of proves that actually Islam is compatible with democracy. And some distinct characteristic of our new modified constitution is we have all these principles of constitutionalism incorporated in our constitution. For instance, the people's sovereignty. By constitution, we have to have a regular, periodical 5 years circulation of powers. So it is one of the aspects of our people's sovereignty. Others is the adherence of human rights. The human rights, including freedom of religions and also freedom of expression, is one of the basic rights, which is we can classify it as categorized as non-alienable, non-derogable rights, and also the principles of rule of law. And I can say that this constitution is a kind of prescriptive constitution rather than just a nominal pseudo democratic constitution. Because sometimes there are constitutions which declare themselves democracy, like People Democratic Republic of, but actually they are not democracy. We have Beside these principles, we have institutions, we have procedures stipulated in our constitution how to implement these principles. For instance, human rights, which is adhered by the Constitution, and the Constitution stated that the government and the state is responsible and must uphold these human rights principles. I think this is some of the achievement that we have, and we do it in a peaceful way, so we are prevented from like a balkanization process that happened in some other countries. And you know that after 15 years almost in this democracy, now we are members of the G20 countries. It's already the ninth. And some reports said that if everything goes well, no serious disturbances, within 20 to 25 years, Indonesia will be among the 4 or 5 largest economy in the world. And also the Gini coefficient also reducing. However, lately, because of some negligence of in our side in consolidating our democracy in one side, on the other side is this the global flows of like decadent way of life, the materialism disseminated deeply and very fast through this digital information system. While on the other hand, we also have this poverty and also this injustice, discrepancy between the poor and the haves. It's created some kind of situation where the other ideas, in this case the radicals, have a very fertile ground to provoke. And many of the youth and many of the idealists is prone to this provocation. And we can see that the penetration of the radicals in Indonesia is growing to an extent, to an alarming extent, as we can see, among others, from what is going on or what's happening in regard with the election of the governor of Jakarta. We planned this trip, a joint partnership trip of interfaith, long before the election of in Jakarta. So that's the motivation that we planned this. Jakarta is, what happening in Jakarta is, I think, a combination of many things, not just religions, but political, economic, rivalry, and things. But however, it's, alerted us that this is alarming also as well. Many schools, many centers in excellent, in elite areas, schools, mosques, public schools, private schools, have been penetrated quite deeply by these radicals. So we have to do some things to maintain this democracy, to maintain this harmonious cooperation in our society, to achieve a better and better development in the futures. I think that's what I would like to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we should go on the list as I have it here, which is to ask next Dr. Shihab to intervene at this point.
Thank you so much. I will be brief, so to give you more time to opportunity to ask the panelists of what you have in your mind to know about Indonesia. As was mentioned that we Indonesian, we cherish the success of democracy and pluralism, and it has been praised, commanded by many as the model for a Muslim populated country. Most of Indonesians, almost 90% Muslim, but at the same time maintain that respect to other religion, other communities of faith, and present itself as a model of pluralism. As we know that Indonesia, as mentioned, is a democratic country. Islam occupies significant position in its policies and has been able to influence political discourse and practices. But what kind of Islam? We can differentiate Islamic practices and Islamic understanding into a rigid, exclusive, and inclusive Islam and open-minded Islam. We are proud to have the inclusive and open-minded Islam, and therefore our relation as Muslim, as the majority, with other communities of faith are cordial, friendly, and we have never had any major dispute, hostility. I said major because there was a minor incident with regard to communal problem religiously, but in general, we are respecting and living in harmony with other communities of faith. As we know, Indonesia recognized 6 religions, and we can live harmoniously as Indonesians, even though Indonesia has almost 90% Muslim, but Muslim never imposed on having an Islamic state or religion of Islam as the religion of the state. However, after presenting this good news, let me try to alert all of us about the seemingly bad news towards not only Indonesia, but towards the most Muslim countries and also Western countries with regard to the rising and increasing presence of radicalism. Pluralism requires open-minded attitude. And we in Indonesia accept this democracy and compatibility with modernity and Islam, I think mostly attributed to the societal values and people's character and attitude. We know Indonesians are non-confrontative people. They are a consensus-seeking people. They respect others to the extent that sometimes you are not aware if your interlocutor is angry or upset. Just to get that cordial relation between you. And this is something that we cherish as Indonesian. And you can see the character of most Indonesians are friendly to the extent that people do not know them because they never create any noisy appearance and no, yeah, anything that could create tension among themselves. And therefore, the increasing presence of radicalism in the world, and also we feel in Indonesia, is an alarming phenomenon. And we really have to do something as a collective responsibility among ourselves as Indonesians at the same time with the global community. And I think one of the aim of our visit to Europe and the United States is to present the good news and also the unpleasant news with regard to the increasing penetration of the rigid understanding of Islam, the close-minded understanding of Islam, and the exclusive way of interpreting Islam as a whole. I think we need a systematic counter to halt this fast penetration. One of which is we have to try effectively to use media to enlighten our people, to counter the argument of those exclusive understanding of the teaching of Islam through media, through social media, through radio, because most of our Indonesian youth are not quite knowledgeable about what is Islam is all about. When we talk about democracy, we talk about the compatibility of democracy and Islam. Lack of knowledge is something that lead them into an astray or a deviated way of understanding Islam. And therefore, enlightenment is very important to try to lead them into the right path. And as mentioned, that Indonesian Muslims are having this middle way Islam, meaning that non-extremist understanding of Islam, very soft Islam. And this is attributed to the two largest Islamic organizations in the country, namely Nahdlatul Ulama, was founded in 1926, and before that, Muhammadiyah, founded 1912. Those two organizations are of middle path character in educating Muslim in Indonesia. This is a homegrown organization. Only lately, with the imported Islamic organization, has network in the Middle East mostly, now started to penetrate Indonesian Muslim and to influence them to be more radical and to see that there is another Islam which suit their psychological need. And as mentioned, radicalism not only because of ideological factor, but there are many factors at play. The gap between the have and the have-not, the rampant corruption, and there is also something called the gap between the poor and the rich created a lot of frustration, and therefore when radicalism, when the new ideology introduced to Indonesia, they are attracted to this ideology. And therefore it is important and it is imperative that we have to empower the two largest organizations, Muhammadiyah and you, and at the same time we have to try to reform our education, our curriculum, and at the same way we need to empower the newly emerging youth organization, which could be led into the middle path understanding of Islam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll come back to some of these issues, including the challenge of radical Islam, which, as you suggest, is not homegrown, but is actually external influence. We have next Dr. Azumadi Azra from the State Islamic University in Jakarta, where I had a wonderful time. He was my host.
Thank you, Professor Lamin. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There has been a lot of has been said about the compatibility between Islam and democracy in Indonesia, and of course, I believe that Indonesia is indeed a showcase of compatibility between Islam and democracy. One day, when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton paid her first visit to Indonesia, she told me that if somebody asked her about where he or she can find the compatibility between Islam and democracy, modernity, high women position, and Hillary Clinton said, I would suggest him or her to visit Indonesia. So this is the impression of Hillary Clinton about the compatibility of Islam and democracy. Actually, the Indonesian Muslim experience with democracy is not new. Muslims have accepted democracy since the very foundation, in the first day of Declaration of Independence on August 17, 1945. And in early November 1945, Vice President Muhammad Hatta declared an appeal to the people to form political parties because Indonesian leaders agreed to have democracy, competitive democracy. So, so as a result, we had our first competitive liberal democracy in the election 1955. This is the very first democratic election. But unfortunately, in 1959, Sukarno introduced what he called as a guided democracy, because he felt that liberal democracy had been very divisive among people. There was a lot of quarrel among politicians, among people. So he introduced guided democracy, which is basically is only a guise of Sukarno authoritarianism, civilian, of course. So we had civilian authoritarianism between 1955 to 1965, when Sukarno, when failed communist coup d'etat forced Sukarno to basically to transfer power to General Suharto. And later Suharto, of course, also introduced Pancasila democracy with a regular election. We had a regular election with 3 parties involved. But of course, democracy is more than regular election. We need, of course, vibrant civil society. We need freedom of association. We need free press. So that's we gain after the monetary, economic, and political crisis since the late 1997, 1998. In May 1998, Suharto decided to resign from power, and then his vice president, Habibie, became a new president. And Habibie introduced, soon enough, liberal democracy, competitive democracy, multi-party democracy. And I think we owe a lot of debt to Habibie, President Habibie, even though his interregnum is very short, less than 2 years. And our first president, democratically elected president, was Abdurrahman Wahid, fondly called as a Gus Dur, and the Speaker of People Consultative Assembly was Amin Rais. These 2 leaders, when they were, elected in their position, were in fact the national leader of 2 largest Muslim organizations that has been mentioned earlier. Abdurrahman Wahid was the national leader of Nahdlatul Ulama, the revival of ulama that was established long time ago in 1926 in opposition to the rise of Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca and Medina, in the Hijaz. And the second largest organization, Muhammadiyah, was founded even earlier in 1912. So I believe these 2 and of course there are many other smaller organizations, similar organizations across the country. They are guardian of, Indonesian Islam. I love to argue that Indonesian Islam is not only wasatiyah Islam, but is a flowery Islam, colorful Islam, which rich with local tradition. Professor Lamin Saneh, I think you observe it in Yogyakarta. Yeah? You can call it also a relaxed Islam. That doesn't mean that we are less Islamic. Yeah? If you come to Jakarta, visit Indonesia during Ramadan, and then you feel it. Yeah? That Ramadan is most observable in Indonesia if you compare it with somewhere else. Yeah. You can also read some research by scholars. Let's say by Professor Nikki Keddie of UCLA in 1986, comparing male Muslims in Jakarta, Cairo, and Tehran in their loyalty to do Jum'ah prayer. And she found that Indonesian Muslim male, are the most loyal. I think more than 90% were going to do Jum'ah prayer. While in Cairo, Egypt only 70%. and Tehran is only around 31%. Because why? Because in Tehran you have only one mosque to do Jum'ah prayer, but in Indonesia you can find mosque everywhere. Why you can find mosque everywhere in Indonesia? Because Jum'ah is not holiday in Indonesia. It's working day, so they have to pray in their office or probably in the mall, big mall, or in many places. While in the Middle East, Friday is holiday. So you can find mosque mostly only in the neighborhood rather than in offices or something like that. So so this is very distinct. I can also refer you to comparative study by Professor Riaz Hassan on the Muslim faith lines, about the degree of, let's say, belief in God, in the Prophet Muhammad, loyalty to let's say fiqh, for instance, Islamic jurisprudence, Muslim faith lines. And then the last, I think, I can also refer you to research done by Professor Robert Hefner of Boston University, comparing again Muslim practices. So that's why I always appeal to Indonesian Muslim not to be to have some kind of inferiority complex vis-a-vis our Muslim brother and sister somewhere else. So even though Islam is embedded in Indonesian Islam embedded in local culture, but again, it doesn't mean that Indonesian Muslim are less Islamic compared to Muslims somewhere else. The problem is with Indonesian Muslim, they are low profile, like Professor Alwi Siap said. We don't want to speak out, mostly. That's why the role of Indonesia in the Islamic world was very minimal. Why? Because Indonesia doesn't punch its weight in international diplomacy. Indonesia should play a greater role. Try to mediate, conflict somewhere else. Even though now Indonesian civil society are more active in, let's say, in giving relief support to Myanmar, to Rohingya, and also even to Palestinian. Indonesian relief organization has been successful to construct a big hospital in Gaza. Now they are also going to build a new hospital in the Rohingya area. Of course, this is not state budget, but Islamic philanthropic budget. So now I think our challenge to the future, because we already talked about the infiltration of the radical, I think this is one of many unintended consequences of democracy. In the first 5 years of democracy, liberal democracy, since the first election, 1999, almost every day we had demonstration. So that's why in Indonesia we call democracy rather than democracy. Democracy rather than democracy. Of course, the number of demonstrations now is less compared to in the period, let's say, first year of liberal democracy. So this is the first one. The second one, I think, also breakdown of law and order. Police has been criticized by civil society organization because they do not take decisive and firm action any radical group who takes law into their own hands. The most notorious, of course, the Islamic Defense Front, led by Rizik Syihab in Jakarta. But we are fortunate I think, President Jokowi is firmer against the radical. but not President SBY. SBY often condone, violent radical groups by accepting them in their office, for instance. So I think we need to consolidate our democracy. We should accelerate the creation of good governance. As long as corruption is still rampant, and then I think there are people who love to take laws into their own hands, particularly in local areas, because now people said that during Suharto period we had corruption only in central government, but now with the implementation of local autonomy, there has been some kind of decentralization of corruption. So many mayor and also district chief, and of course ministers, governors have been put into prison because of corruption cases. The last point is that another intended consequences of democracy is the rise of religio-political groups that have strong orientation to the Middle East, like Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, Party of Liberation in Indonesia. The HTI actually was introduced initially during Suharto, but they were lying low because, of course, they cannot campaign for creation of caliphate or implementation of Sharia because, you cannot say that. You will soon be, be captured, be detained by the military. But now, after the introduction of liberal democracy, HTI, campaign for caliphate and also Sharia openly. And the government cannot ban it, cannot make HTI illegal like in other countries in the Middle East. Hizbut Tahrir is banned, also in Central Asia, also even in Malaysia, but not in Indonesia. So this is a problem. There is a lot of discussion now among lawmakers in Indonesia how to create a law or regulation that will allow police or government to ban this kind of Islamic groups. And also, it is also related to the law on anti-terror, for instance. Now it is going to be revised in the parliament because the law is quite weak. If Indonesian return, let's say from ISIS, like I think 2 weeks ago, there are some people who returned, who were deported by Turkish authorities to Indonesia, and the Indonesian government and the police cannot detain them. The most they can do is only to interview them. That's it. So this is also a problem. So the key, I think, for Indonesian problem now is, as I suggested, first is of course continued consolidation of democracy. We need to bring credibility to the political parties, of course. Loss of credibility and accountability of the political parties. And then we need also to accelerate the creation of good governance, and also a more decisive law enforcement. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And Dr. Amin Abdullah was also my host at Jakarta, where we arrived on a very hot afternoon and had a wonderful visit in the boarding school of the Nurul Ummahat boarding school for girls.
Yeah.
Quite amazing. We thought you couldn't run such a boarding school in the United States for many reasons. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is not easy to speak in the last minute. The easiest way is to wrap up what has been clarified by my colleagues. The key issues actually is the word religions here. What do we mean by religions, and especially if it is connected with the pluralism. And then in the middle is the word democratic. Muslim acceptance of Pancasila actually is the root of pluralism in Indonesia. If in that time, in 1945, Muslim didn't accept Pancasila, so there will be no Indonesia. There will be no such kind of Indonesian model as it is mentioned our topic today. So I would like to underscore this, that the Muslim acceptance of the Pancasila actually is the root of pluralism in Indonesia. As my colleagues expressed that what is Pancasila, so yeah, this is the intellectual genuinity of our founding fathers and mothers, actually, because you know that in Turkey experience with their secularism, like French secularism, and also America also have this type of governance. And Indonesia, of course, selects the new terminology which is suitable for the context of Indonesia. So that is why President Sukarno in that time, in 1945, in his speech about Pancasila, it consists of 5 items, as my colleague explained it. The first is the belief in the Supreme Court. I will not mention the others because my colleague already. But what does it mean, belief in the Supreme Court? So this is actually the most important one when Sukarno explained this issue, because it means that all Indonesian people believe in God. Maybe it is rather difference with the French understanding of what is God in the state. But what does it mean? It is in the sense that a Christian believe in God in harmony with the teaching of Jesus Christ. And Muslim also believe in God in accordance with Muhammad teaching. And also Buddhists, Hindu also, they believe in God in accordance with their Holy Scripture. So in that way, the Indonesian state is a state where all believers can worship God in according with his own choice of religions. So it's exactly like what we have here in United States, similar in the United States. So Indonesian people believe in God in a refined meaning. And refined meaning means that believing in God without egoism. Without egoism in the name of any religion, be Christian, Muslim, or those things. Okay, then the example of my city, for example, as Lamin Saneh, Professor Lamin Saneh also visits us, Yogyakarta city. Yogyakarta, 20% of its inhabitants are Christians, and 80% are Muslim. But the relationships between adherents of religions in Yogyakarta is very, very clearly very, very democratic and peaceful and harmonious life. So this is the type of Indonesian model when you compare it with what happens in Egypt, for example. Of course, there is some cases, local situations, but it is not national situations. So shortly speaking, there are three elements which makes Indonesian Muslim as a model, quote unquote, for our contemporary and difficult situation today. The first is that plurality, inclusiveness is the very, very texture of Indonesia. From religions, from ethnicity, and from any other kinds of difficult issues. The second one, the social cohesiveness is the cultural and social capital of Indonesia. So you can find religious life, solidarity, cordial, smiling, and so forth. It is very, very Indonesian type of Muslim. And the third one, this is the most difficult actually, the Indonesian Muslim can combine between the Islamic belief, the Islamic teaching, and the common good of the nation state. So this is the most very, very difficult situation because the challenge from radical today, they are asking about this issue. They are questioning about this issue. But I myself believe that as long as the Indonesian people have these three elements, so the Indonesian model can be a very good example actually. But if we cannot depend on these three elements, so we cannot differentiate what happens in the Middle East and also in other parts of the Muslim world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So many issues there. Pluralism, which has come up quite a bit. Social cohesion. Also Pancasila as the basis of the Constitution. The two lessons I came away with from Indonesia, among other things. The first is, in terms of the political project of Indonesia, is pluralism, diversity, inclusiveness. It's the point that the government, the state, cannot transcend the society of its jurisdiction. And so Pancasila, if you like, gave birth to the Indonesian constitution, which gave birth to the state. And the state has to, in a sense, reflect this tremendous diversity and inclusiveness and the commitment which is grounded in civil society. The second is that Indonesia does not play a statistical game. That is to say, it doesn't allot political power according to numerical strength or lack of strength. And it cuts both ways. The majority Muslim population is not asking for privileges that are proportionate to its to its strength, to its numerical strength in society that way. But the other way also it cuts, namely that small communities in Indonesia, Hindus are about under 2% of the population. The other groups in the society that are minority groups are not excluded by virtue of their size or their number. And it seems to me what makes that work is that Pancasila then acts as a kind of binding, cohesive element of civil society that the government reflects in its character, in its operations. Anyway, over to you. We've had a rich diet here, and it's over to you to nibble on this cornucopia of ideas. Any questions?
It has been so clear that nobody will try to find out. Yeah, okay. That one.
Hi, thank you so much to the panel for a very rich and enlightening discussion. I'm thinking a lot about the media discourse on Indonesia, and I think there is a certain shift in the way in which Indonesia is gradually portrayed. And one of the challenges, I think, to the idea of an inclusive Islam in Indonesia is the increasingly close ties with Saudi Arabia. For example, there's a lot being said in the media about the recent visit of Saudi rulers to Indonesia in March, and I'm wondering if you could comment on the sort of changing relationship between Indonesia and the countries in the Middle East, and whether this is a warranted focus or something that that is doesn't really sort of impact Indonesian society as a whole. Thank you so much.
I think Indonesia and the Middle East, and especially Saudi Arabia, has a long traditional relation, cordial relation. Just to give you an example, that the founders of two largest organizations were studying in Mecca. But on the other hand, Saudi Arabia's understanding and of the Islamic teaching is a different school of thought that has been introduced and practiced and conveniently accepted by the whole Indonesia. And therefore, it created a sort of tension sometimes, because when the cleric of the Saudis, with good intention, wanted to explain the pristine Islam or the pure Islam as they see it, that could create problem with regard to the majority of Muslims who have been practicing Islam on other understanding or other school of thought thinking. But I think Saudi Arabia and Indonesia is trying to do a sort of mutual understanding. The Saudis know exactly that Indonesian Islam or Indonesian understanding of Islam is different, and we Indonesian people, government level and organization, we are trying to inform and to enlighten them that we are not in a position to switch to an understanding that is incompatible with our culture. Our culture is accepting, inclusive culture. We embrace all religious communities as part of the whole family, while they don't have that kind of pluralism. So we are trying our best to create that mutual understanding.
Yeah. Can I add something?
Yes, sir.
Actually, it is not new that Saudi Arabian government and private institutions try to influence the course of Islam, Indonesian Islam, let's say. Particularly with the rise of Saudi Arabia as a petrodollar country since the early 1980s. And the Saudis were in a bitter competition with Iran, of course. Ayatollah Khomeini, Islamic Revolution of 1979 was, I mean, the Iranian government tried to export this Islamic Revolution, including to Indonesia, in order to topple what the Iranian regime call as the authoritarian regime of Suharto regime at the time, of course. But I don't think that after how many almost 4 decades of the hard work of Saudi Arabia and also Iran to export their brand of Islam, I don't see any much progress actually. There are not many Indonesian convert to Wahhabism, particularly among the NU Nahdlatul Ulama members. Even the very term Wahhabiyah or Wahhabism is anathema. It is a pejorative because the belief and practice of Wahhabism run contrary to the practice of Nahdiyin, of NU members. For instance, just to give you one example. For instance, NU people are very fond of doing religious visitation, the ziarah, ziarah to the tomb of the saints, or ziarah to the predecessors, something like that. Yeah. So I said that Indonesian in general cannot live without tombstone, while in Saudi Arabia you cannot find tombstone. So for Indonesian, Wahhabism is very, very dry and primitive. Dry and primitive. While Indonesia love to, particularly the Javanese, to have a deep religious experience. So that's why Sufism is very, very strong in Indonesia. Some of Sufism have been transformed into kebatinan or kejawen, Javanese mysticism, some of them. Yeah. So I'm not, if let's say, if you go to Jakarta, for instance, yeah, it is very difficult to find any single mosque that has been built by Saudi money. No. Only one mosque that partly financed by the Saudi money, that is Arif Rahman Mosque, that belong to University of Indonesia through certain deal. Probably some people call it dirty deal. Get probably, I don't know how much, probably 50 billion rupiah. But at the same time, University of Indonesia granted a honorary doctoral degree to the Saudi king. And director of University of Indonesia, with some, I don't know how many people flew all the way to Riyadh to bring the certificate of doctoral honorary degree. So it is very difficult. I think this is also related to the very nature of Indonesian Islam, which is very independent vis-a-vis state. I think more than 99% of Islamic institutions, including mosque, particularly mosque, built by Muslim themselves. They get no finance from subsidy from government, except probably one or two, the so-called state mosques. President Sukarno was very ashamed to find that in Russia there is a mosque, even named Sukarno's mosque. But in Jakarta there is no state mosque, so he decided to build a mosque later named Istiqlal, independent. But any other mosque have been built by Muslim, particularly I think in 1980s with the rise of Muslim middle class. I remember when I first came to Jakarta in 1975, there were only two beautiful mosques, big mosques in Jakarta. The first one is of course Istiqlal. The second one is Azhar Mosque in Kebayoran Baru. But now you can find, many beautiful mosques in Jakarta or any other places. So, okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have about 10 minutes or so. We have to go.
Terlalu panjang nanti saya nggak terkontrol.
Of the Indonesian government has allowed it to be so inclusive and embrace such diversity and a culture that's dominated is predominantly Islam. I know you said earlier that numbers does not translate to political power. What is it about the structure of the Indonesian government that really allows that to occur?
I think Pancasila is one clue into that, but I'll allow our Indonesian friends to
Pak Tobing.
respond.
Yes. For instance, in a consensus agreement, the requirement for a president is only that he must be or she must be Indonesian from the birth, like in the United States. And it's of course has a long roots to our cultures and to the thanks again to our founding fathers and founding mothers that educate the peoples that that in this relationship with the state affairs you cannot discriminate peoples because of their beliefs. The genuine attitude of the Indonesian people from all over the island. We have more than 1,000 ethnicities and more than 700 languages, is that we are trained to live together, to respect each others. So it's just a result of a long history that we live together.
Joe.
I wonder if you might say something about tolerance of Muslims for Muslims within Indonesia, since ethnicity has been brought up. Islam as practiced in Aceh is a very different sort of Islam from that practiced in East Java. And if I were an Islamic radical in Indonesia, I would look to Aceh and say, that's the future of the country. So I wonder if you could speak to the internal heterogeneity of Islam as within Indonesia itself and what that effect might have on future issues of politics.
Yeah.
You want to answer it? I think you need to change your perspective, because now if you want to see the origin of the radicals, you can find mostly Javanese, not Acehnese. Look what happened, with Amrozi and many terrorists that have been detained by the police or have been sentenced by the court. Mostly come from Java, including also in Poso, in Ambon communal conflict, they came from Java. Okay. I think now, of course, I agree with you. There should be strengthening of tolerance among Muslims, because particularly in the case of the election in Jakarta, Muslims have been, accused of being infidel by, the supporter of certain group, by Muslim, conservative or radicals, have been accused of being infidel. So not only, the Christian, but also even Muslim have been accused.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
So in Aceh case, I think it's a special case. The government tolerate this kind of special law in Aceh as a cause for a peaceful agreement. So to save lives, thousands of people have died, and to some extent we can thanks to the tsunami, which opened the opportunity to have a deal. Actually, if the government, the military crushed the GAM, the Aceh movement during that period when they were so weak, it's the time. But then the government find that we must have a peaceful solution. And and the purpose is to bring them step by step to integrate to other parts of the society. And this kind of Sharia law in Aceh is not popular among the peoples of Aceh themselves. And one of the indication is that in Aceh we have local political parties. So I think 2 or 3 of them that's quite seen as a powerful party. And all others, national political parties also exist and active in that province. Step by step in the election, now the national political parties is the majority, and the locals is decreasing. So yeah, we should be patient and consistent, to save lives. And actually, in my view, it is not about the religion. Actually, it's a feeling of being betrayed, being forgotten. Yeah. They contribute so much during the revolutions, and this is the last area that was defeated by the Dutch. They feel like betrayed.
Yeah.
So it's more.
Tom.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful, enlightening discussion. I was in Indonesia last year at Duta Wacana.
Oh, okay.
And
Salatiga.
ICRS also.
ICRS.
So I'm sure you're familiar with these 2 institutions. But you mentioned, I think it was Dr. Shihab mentioned that young people's lack of knowledge, and this is a real challenge. And the 2 main Muslim groups are trying to respond. Is it a lack of knowledge of Islamic teaching, or is it a lack of knowledge of the Islamic and Javanese roots of Pancasila? Is it both? You mentioned, several of you mentioned how Pancasila is sort of a middle way Islam in Indonesia. However, it's also Javanese, right? It's a kind of a philosophical construction too. So is it because of globalization that young people are attracted to this radical idea? And can these local communities provide what you might call remedial socialization? Is that possible in today's world?
You are, as I also mentioned earlier, that the rise of radicalism is not because of a single factor. The globalization is part of it, but the rampant corruption and the gap,
Injustice. Injustice.
and at the same time, those radicals who came with a fresh idea about what so-called pristine Islam and tried to invite them to be a good Muslim by convincing them that while you Indonesians so far practicing Islam and you end up with this kind of frustration, this is because of your Islam is wrong. Yeah? So come together and try to create an Islamic understanding, an Islamic state, which then being practiced at full and going back to the early generation. This is an attractive invitation, linking the teaching of Islam with the current situation, psychologically and acceptable, and frustration of the rampant corruption. And don't forget that those radicals penetrate the heart and mind of the youth, especially by saying that you Muslims are being marginalized. Look, who are the richest among the rich? How many Muslims there?
Yeah.
You see, this is a very powerful argument. So therefore, the president can sense this radicalism is not only ideological factor, but the ideology, like putting fire on, putting gas on the already existing fire. So now President Jokowi announced that he is trying to get unproductive land, even though owned by people, to be distributed to the poor, and through the pesantrens, through the traditional school, who are mostly having this kind of frustration. And at the same time, also announced that he will invite Muslim scholars to come with proposal of economic endeavor, business, and he is asking them because they want them to accept this idea, and has already forced the conglomerate to share some of their money to be the capital of this kind of new enterprises, just to address the issue, and from the top.
It's been an amazing session, at least for me. We have a reception waiting for us, but I wonder if I might just summarize very briefly what we've had here. Ambassador Tobin began by affirming that Islam is compatible with democracy. That's a kind of fundamental premise of the work that they have been doing in Indonesia. We have been alerted to the danger of a radical ideology penetrating Indonesian society, and a kind of implicit challenge to the West to join Indonesia in meeting this contemporary challenge. It's not only a challenge for Indonesia, it's a challenge for the international community. And I would say, according to remarks we've already had on this panel, it's a challenge also to Islam. That it is a distortion of the spiritual message of Islam to twist it into political sectarianism. The third, of course, is the profile of Indonesian Islam. That Indonesian Muslims are fairly low-key in international organizations, and Indonesian Islam doesn't have a very high profile in discussions about Islam, involvement in relief work, hospital care, and so forth and so on. And that this profile of Indonesian Islam is not only for domestic consumption, but is also for sharing widely in the campaign, not only against radical Islam, but in the campaign to recover the initiative of Islam itself as a spiritual force in the lives of Muslims all over the world. When I was in Jakarta, I did hear Professor Asras speak about this sort of lively Islam or relaxed Islam, this flowering of Islam, this enthusiastic Islam. And I was reminded, because of the nature of the audience, that this is really batik Islam, an Indonesian form of Islam, where the image is imprinted on the fabric. But that image comes in different shapes and sizes and colors. But the batik, the fabric, is strong enough to hold those images without the fabric tearing apart or without distorting those images either. And it seems to me that special, if you like, genius of Indonesian Islam, it's like a good dish, is worth sharing with the rest of the world. Thank you so much for honoring us.